Of all the strange stuff we've seen out here, the bubble has got to be one of the biggest mysteries. The only way I can describe it is it's like a massive invisible ball, almost like some kind of science fiction force field. It's got a 2,000-foot radius, and it reaches both above and below ground.
In northeastern Utah lies a place where the earth hoards secrets, and the sky actively defies physics. For most, the name Skinwalker Ranch conjures images of cattle mutilations, glowing orbs, and shadowy figures stalking the edge of the firelight. We've all heard those campfire tales. But Season 7, Episode 2 of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, titled Flying High, tells a very different story. This episode is quieter, more precise, and frankly, far more unsettling. What unfolds here isn't a fleeting sighting or a vague feeling. It isn't a bump in the night that someone couldn't explain the next morning. Instead, it's a controlled, heavily instrumented, and methodical scientific test. And the data came back loud, clear, and undeniable. First, something is buried beneath the mesa. Second, an invisible, highly structured anomaly is hovering directly above the center of the ranch. It is something so substantial that trained investigators are now resorting to the term force field to describe it. Two distinct anomalies, one below ground, one in the sky, both detected on the same property, within the exact same investigation window. The central question of this video, then, isn't simply what they found. It goes much deeper. If a measurable presence occupies the earth below, and a structured anomaly occupies the sky above, what exactly is Skinwalker Ranch protecting? And what are these researchers actually flying into? The Mesa has always been a focal point of tension in this investigation. It sits on the property like a geological fact that stubbornly refuses to behave like one. Across multiple seasons, teams have worked around it, over it, and through it, consistently yielding data that defies conventional explanation. In Flying High, the team executes a new direct test on the Mesa. Returning to this site wasn't arbitrary. Past anomalies strongly pointed to deep subsurface irregularities. These weren't minor signal deviations you could brush off as iron-rich soil or sedimentary layers. They were the kind of disruptive readings that forced scientists to upgrade their instruments and look closer. And this time, the signal they caught was entirely different. This time, it wasn't just different. It was loud. It was clear. The test produced what investigators described as solid evidence of buried metallic objects beneath the mesa floor. These weren't trace readings. They weren't borderline blips that could vanish depending on how an instrument was calibrated. The evidence was definitive enough to actively propel the investigation forward, a threshold that researchers in a strictly scientific context do not cross lightly. Metallic objects don't spontaneously materialize in the earth. Broadly speaking, there are only two categories of explanation. The first is natural geological formations, such as mineral veins, scattered deposits, or sedimentary metallic concentrations. The second is deliberate placement, meaning someone or something put them there. That distinction isn't just semantic. It is the dividing line between the ranch being a mere geological curiosity and something else entirely. If these objects were intentionally placed, who put them there, when, and why become questions that no standard geological survey can answer. Crucially, the readings from this episode do not depict a naturally scattered deposit pattern. They reveal something concentrated, something structured, something that has been waiting silently beneath the surface through every season of this investigation, until now. To grasp the sheer gravity of these findings, you have to understand the methodology. In this line of research, methodology is the only thing standing between real investigative data and background noise. Ground-based metallic detection in a rugged environment like the Mesa relies on instruments designed to measure subsurface electromagnetic responses. When a sensor array sweeps across the terrain, it is essentially listening to how the Earth talks back. Metallic objects react to electromagnetic stimulation in a vastly different way than organic material, water-saturated rock, or standard sedimentary layers. A clean metallic signal carries a highly specific signature, a consistent, echoing return pattern that modern instruments can easily separate from ambient geological noise. The operative word here is repeatable. A single, isolated reading can be written off by dozens of natural causes. But a reading that repeats, a reading that holds its exact shape across multiple passes, survives different instrument orientations, and maintains a steady amplitude. That is no longer an anomaly. That is a data point. What the Mesa test produced were hard data points, not anomalies. That distinction is everything. It is what allows the scientific team to stand firmly behind their findings, stripping away the ambiguity and leaving us with one undeniable truth. There is metal in the Mesa. When equipment specifically designed to separate signal from noise returns a clean, loud, repeatable metallic response, the question is no longer whether something is there. The question becomes what it is, and how deep it goes. That is the question this episode leaves hanging. Confirming a presence is one thing, but understanding the true nature of that presence requires an entirely different investigation. Midway through the episode, the team makes a decision born of pure investigative intuition. They look up. After the Mesa ground test produces its findings, the investigation pivots vertically. An aerial experiment is launched over the property. A deliberate methodological expansion that signals a profound shift in how the team is beginning to view Skinwalker Ranch. This wasn't a random shot in the dark. When ground-level findings are this significant, the logical next move in a comprehensive investigation is to test whether the anomaly has a vertical signature as well. Think of it as 3D mapping. You establish what lies below. You establish what hovers above. And if both regions return hard data, you are no longer dealing with a localized, surface-level incident. You are dealing with something that occupies physical, measurable dimensional space. You are dealing with a structure. The aerial experiment was designed to probe the atmosphere directly over the ranch. What it found shifted the entire weight of the episode. Directly above the center of Skinwalker Ranch, the instruments didn't return baseline background readings. They returned something else entirely. The team described it as a giant force field, an aerial anomaly of massive scope, positioned not at the edge of the property, not in some peripheral zone, but dead center. And just like that, the ranch stops being a piece of land you stand on and observe. It becomes an environment you're inside of. The phrase, force field, carries a lot of cultural baggage. Science fiction has spent decades training us to hear it, and immediately picture shimmering blue barriers and dramatic shield generators. So, it is worth being extremely precise about what this team means when they use that term. They are not science fiction writers. They are investigators trained to use language with surgical precision. In the context of this aerial experiment, a force field refers to a measurable region of space, where physical and electromagnetic conditions deviate violently from the surrounding baseline. It is an active zone where instruments behave erratically, where signal propagation warps, and where the environment itself reacts in ways that defy everything the surrounding terrain would predict. And the fact that they describe it as giant is not a dramatic exaggeration. It means this affected region operates on a massive geographic scale. It spans a substantial swath of the ranch's middle section, a footprint large enough that it cannot simply be written off as a localized equipment glitch or a narrow geological pocket. Prior seasons have certainly documented aerial anomalies over Skinwalker Ranch, UAP sightings, unexplained radar returns, and atmospheric disturbances reported by pilots and ground observers for years. But documenting a fleeting sighting is vastly different from instrumentally confirming a persistent, measurable environmental condition, and that is exactly where Season 7, Episode 2, crosses the line. The aerial experiment doesn't just capture a moment, it captures a condition. It reveals something ongoing, structural, and positioned directly over the ranch in a way that suggests it isn't going anywhere. This raises the ultimate question every serious investigator must be wrestling with as the data rolls in. Is this a freak natural occurrence? Is it a defense mechanism? Or is it something that was, at some point, deliberately engineered? This is where the episode transcends a mere collection of isolated findings. We have buried metallic objects in the Mesa and an aerial force field above the center of the ranch. Two massive data points from two completely different experiments conducted in the exact same time frame on the exact same property. In any investigation, correlation does not equal causation. Experienced researchers know this. But they also know that when two independent anomalies appear at the same site, at drastically different elevations, both yielding consistent and repeatable signal strength, the possibility of a connection cannot be responsibly ignored. Consider the geometry. If a metallic mass is buried beneath the mesa, one structured enough to produce a loud, clean detection signal, and a measurable force field is positioned at altitude over the center of the ranch, the natural question becomes, are these two things talking to each other? Could the subsurface mass be generating, anchoring, or sustaining the aerial anomaly above it? That isn't a fringe conspiracy question, that is applied physics. Under the right conditions, specific metallic configurations can absolutely produce or amplify electromagnetic fields. Whether that is exactly what is happening at Skinwalker Ranch remains unknown, but the spatial relationship between what lies below and what hovers above is no longer something investigators can brush aside. What makes serious researchers so cautious here is the word that keeps surfacing when they analyze the data. Not paranormal, not supernatural, intentional. And intentional is a word with profound engineering implications. The readings do not scatter randomly. The anomalies cluster. They relate to one another spatially. And that pattern, a pattern of components that appear explicitly designed to work together, is something Skinwalker Ranch has consistently produced across every season of the investigation. We aren't left with an answer here, only a sharper, infinitely more precise version of the question. Taken individually, any one of these findings would be fascinating. Here is the finalized version of your conclusion, bringing all the tension, analysis, and restraint to a sharp, satisfying point. Taken together, these findings suggest a profound shift. The investigators are no longer approaching Skinwalker Ranch through the framework of a haunted land or cursed terrain. What if the ranch isn't a site of random, chaotic, paranormal activity? What if it operates as a system? Underground anomalies, surface phenomena, aerial disturbances, geographically clustered UAP sightings, location-specific biological effects, and electronic interference that blatantly defies the standard distribution of background radiation. These are not the fingerprints of chaos. These are the fingerprints of structure. Other anomalous locations certainly exist globally. Hesteland Valley in Norway, the Bermuda Triangle, and various geoelectric hotspots well documented in academic literature. Yet none of them have produced the sheer density and cross-category consistency of findings that Skinwalker Ranch has generated under controlled, multi-year investigations. Skeptics will inevitably argue that television production incentives create confirmation bias, that investigators are primed to find anomalies simply because the format rewards them. It is a fair structural critique, and it deserves acknowledgement. But the data from this specific episode is instrumented, repeatable, and documented by equipment that does not care about television ratings. A magnetometer does not perform for the camera. A signal return does not get louder because a producer asked it to. The findings from the Mesa test and the aerial experiment do not require a paranormal explanation. They require a scientific one. What they no longer permit, however, is easy dismissal. Watch the team carefully in the moments after the data rolls in. This is where the episode tells a second, subtler story, one that runs beneath the instrumentation and technical jargon. When experienced investigators encounter a finding that genuinely shocks them, they do not perform surprise. They go quiet, they recalibrate, they choose their words with far more precision than usual. That is exactly what you witness here. Not theatrics, not the wide-eyed melodrama that reality television typically reaches for. What you see is something infinitely more revealing: restraint. The team does not jump to conclusions. They do not make grand announcements. They describe the data and they stop there. If you've watched enough of this show, you know that is not always their default mode. When investigators who are usually willing to speculate suddenly become this measured and careful, that behavioral shift is itself a massive piece of data. It forces us to ask, what are they not saying? They aren't saying the ranch is extraterrestrial. They aren't saying the force field is a defense system, or that the buried metallic objects are non-human in origin. They are simply saying, here is what the instruments returned. And they are leaving the interpretation conspicuously, heavily open. In investigative documentary work, what a researcher chooses not to conclude is often the most critical moment on film. It shows you exactly where the edge of their certainty lies. In this episode, that edge lands somewhere deeply significant, right at the razor-thin boundary between "we detected something real" and "we don't know what it means yet." And that boundary is exactly where the real investigation lives. This isn't the first time the sky above Skinwalker Ranch has generated data that shatters conventional atmospheric science. In the late 1990s, the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, began conducting rigorous research on this exact property. Their documentation included aerial phenomena, UAP observations, and severe electromagnetic irregularities that their scientific team, which included credentialed physicists and aerospace engineers, could not account for using standard models. While the NIDS data was never fully published, enough of it filtered into the research community to establish a crucial fact. Aerial anomaly detection at this location has a documented history spanning decades. More recently, the U.S. government's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, has been tasked with investigating UAP reports that intersect with national security interests. Skinwalker Ranch sits squarely in a region that has generated military-adjacent UAP reports for years. Whether AARO's classified investigations overlap with the findings of this episode remains publicly unknown, but the institutional attention is undeniably there. What Season 7, Episode 2 adds to this history is instrumented, contemporary data. It was collected using technology that simply did not exist during the NIDS era and interpreted by a team armed with that historical baseline. The ranch has been broadcasting these signals for a long time. The difference now is that our instruments have finally become sensitive enough to hear them clearly. This episode didn't discover something new. It confirmed something old, and that distinction carries a massive amount of weight. Here is why the findings from this single episode matter far beyond the boundaries of a television show. If the aerial force field detected above Skinwalker Ranch is real, verifiable, and reproducible under controlled conditions, the implications bleed into territory that institutional science has historically refused to enter. A persistent, measurable electromagnetic anomaly of significant geographic scale, positioned above private land, defying all natural geological or atmospheric explanations, raises questions that transcend the paranormal. It forces us to question our fundamental understanding of environmental physics. What unknown technologies or processes could possibly synthesize such a condition? Do similar anomalies exist elsewhere, remaining undetected simply because no one has looked with the right equipment? For decades, UAP researchers have argued that the phenomena they study point toward physics that current models cannot accommodate. Military analysts have officially acknowledged that certain observed aerial phenomena demonstrate capabilities far exceeding known human technology. Physicists working in edge-case electromagnetic theory have drafted mathematical frameworks that allow for field configurations that standard models completely fail to predict. None of these communities have converged on a single explanation. Yet, from their entirely different vantage points, they are all pointing at the exact same question. What this episode delivers is a highly specific, aggressively localized, and strictly measurable data point within that massive, unresolved picture. This is no longer just entertainment. This is instrumented evidence, and instrumented evidence, even when it emerges from a dusty ranch in Utah, demands to be taken seriously. So here is exactly what this episode confirmed. Beneath the mesa, buried metallic objects, detected via a clean, repeatable signal, existing at a scale and configuration that natural geology simply cannot explain. Above the ranch, a measurable aerial anomaly of immense geographic scope, anchored directly over the center of the property, emitting a data signature so consistent that trained investigators are now resorting to the language of theoretical physics to describe it. 2 findings, 2 elevations, 1 episode, 1 property. Yet, what remains unresolved is everything that actually matters: the true nature of those buried objects, the source and mechanism of the aerial anomaly, and whether the two are inextricably linked. If they are connected, is that connection passive, or is it actively communicating? Did someone or something deliberately bury what lies? Researchers who realize their findings are becoming dangerously significant. They have mapped the ground. They have mapped the sky. Now, the telemetry from both extremes is pointing inward, converging on the dead center of the ranch, aimed directly at whatever engine is generating these conditions from within or beneath. If you have followed this investigation long enough, you know Skinwalker Ranch never surrenders its answers easily. Every confirmed finding spawns 3 new questions. Every deciphered signal simply points toward a deeper, darker one. The ultimate question Season 7 is quietly, relentlessly building toward, the one this episode makes entirely impossible to ignore, is this. If they now know what is hovering above, and they are finally beginning to understand what lies below, what exactly are they going to face when they finally reach the middle? The ranch isn't done talking. It is just deciding what to say next.